to go straight to the QA session. So if you have any question.
I recall Sajid Kwame Nkrumah's statement that seek ye first the political kingdom and all else shall follow. Now, he didn't mean it was going to be easy. And also, when he said that Africa, Ghana cannot be free until all Africa is free, you know, that's Pan-Africanism, but at the same time, I could just as well say, we in America, me in America as a black person, cannot be free until all of Africa is free. Or Africa cannot be free until the blacks, or the black man in America is free. And what that is saying is that the struggle is international. You know, Pan-African, George Padmore, if you read George Padmore, you know, George Padmore simply says that Pan-Africanism is the methodology for organizing black people and organizing Africa to be a part of the international struggle. So we can't separate it, you know. And the gentleman here from Congo gave a great speech. And one thing I like to say about Lumumba, Patrice Lumumba, said, he said, because I said that the wealth of the Congo belonged to the Congolese people, and that I would not accept a bribe, they called me a communist. This is a gem. This is a great quote on the Marxist Internet website, but it shows that, you know, the purity and the decency of Patrice Lumumba. And, you know, it reminded me of Malcolm X, but these are great leaders. Oh, sorry.
Thank you, my brother. Thank you.
In a communal society. How does a communal society combat an individual society? Western culture is based on individualism. Africa society and culture is based on communalism. So how does a communal society combat an individual society?
So I guess there are multiple layers that are embedded in that question for me. There's the question of at what level of organization are we talking? We're talking about in the family, we're talking about in the community, we're talking about states themselves. In the case of the United States, we have a huge country. So I think one of the questions that I think we talked about at the last conference when we were thinking about next steps for Pan-Africanism was this idea, talking about at all of those levels of organization, is with whom do you see yourself connected? And so I think for Africans, they too, as part of colonization, have started to internalize the individualist culture. And so I think even to assume that all Africans still retain some notion of communalism is to not appreciate the variation that's there too. So certainly there are, I think if you read Cheikh Anta Diop, I mentioned him, he has a book that talks about some of the common cultural dimensions that you find in West Africa. So there are some tendencies there which I would say are communalism, but I would also caution us against sort of flattening the variation that's in Africa and underappreciating the ways in which Africans themselves have internalized individualism. So I think one of the things we might do, I mean, one of the concepts in Ghana, Senkofa, is one of these Negro symbols where you see the bird with the neck going back. I think is to go back and get it, but to go back and get it with a deep appreciation that even during ancient times there was a high amount, there was significant variation on the African continent. And so there too is always a question to me of taking what works and bringing that forward and leaving behind that which didn't, right? And then now thinking about what we've learned and taking what works and leaving behind what didn't. So you heard me quoting a lot of dead white guys like Marx. Like, not everything Marx says is useful, but there's a lot he says it is useful. And I think part of our work is to think about, I think as someone said, we're in the empire. We're in the empire, so let's be in the empire taking advantage of our vantage point as people of African descent to understand those aspects of communalism that we can use that would be useful now. And some of the things we can learn from individualism that can help us to reframe our sense of what actually will work to combat these very clear existential threats, because I don't know that it's necessarily going to be one particular philosophical model that will get us where we need to go.
Yeah, and Doctor, I'm not on the panel, so, and then we started a little bit late, so I'm not going to answer the question. After, then we can talk about Black African collectivism. Julius Nyerere did some research on it. He tried to promote it. Cheikh Anta Diop, Kwame Nkrumah, Kenneth Kaunda, and that today people call Ubuntu. which is about African collectivism, where we can have a conversation around. Okay, next question.
Hello, my name is Esau, and I'm 18 years old. I came over from Baltimore, and I've been doing my research on Pan-Africanism. I recently watched the videos on Kwame Ture, and I saw this on Meetup, and I was very excited to be here, and all the speakers were wonderful. I appreciate y'all more than you could ever know. And I was just wondering, after I leave here, like I said, I'm 18, I'm not really sure as to what I can do to try to push this movement forward. Because like I said, I'm all the way out of water, so I was just wondering, just what would you guys recommend that I do when I leave here?
You know, you talk about Kwame Ture, and many of us work with Kwame, and you know that his major message was for us to be organized. That in fact is the weapon that we use to advance our people's struggles. So I would say you have to get into an organization. Kwame always says if you can't find one that you like, then you start your own organization. Now, there are some fantastic ones around. I think one of the most progressives I've seen in quite some time emerging is in fact the Pan-African Community Action. Yes. Here in DC. I would say link up with these folks, and they're in the room, and they will make themselves available to you. We're trying to organize war, repression, and imperialism. So we are bringing into this alliance organizations and individuals who understand that we've got to be organized, and we've got to fight if you want real justice. So it's all about organization, it's about struggle, and so that is the watchword that I hope you take away today.
Is be the spark in the university near you, get high school students, and start having this kind of meeting, and tell people about what it's about. Right. Find places where you can direct them to the references. We have books out there. So just find things you can do. One man can make a difference. You can make a difference. Don't wait for somebody to tell you you can't make a difference. So think of that. Learn how to write proposals, get money to help people empowerment, talk to churches, do things like that. Any little thing is better than no thing. That's all I'm going to say.
Thank you, brother.
African leaders who were trumpeting a different vision than what we see today. Whether we're talking about the assassination of Lumumba, assassination of Sankara, we're talking about the overthrow of Nkrumah. So we have to contextualize it for people that it's not just, okay, we go to the African continent, people who are not in alignment with us. We have to lay it out and show, demonstrate how it is that Africa today, for all intents and purposes, is ruled by neocolonial agents. And what it's going to take to overthrow those neocolonial agents. And whether you're talking about in Rwanda, and Uganda, and Congo, and Togo, you have young people, Ghana, young people who are organizing. So I know for a fact that what we're doing here, once we connect with those people who are organized, if we organize here to resist U.S. imperialism, that helps people on the ground there. And those folks who are organizing in the streets, those folks who are the victims of U.S. equipment that's sent to these heads of states that are crushing the resistance movement in the streets, they know that we're pushing back on that here. They're not going to be refusing that assistance. So for us, it's critical that we engage in a solidarity movement that's confronting U.S. imperialism. It's confronting U.S. effort to continue to militarize the African continent, and we support those Pan-African social justice movement, particularly among the young, that are taking place on the African continent. So I think that's where our focus really should be, and whether it's the youth in the Congo, youth in Togo, youth in Uganda, they're all looking for us who are on the inside of the empire to provide them with support, to provide them with solidarity. So I think that's where we should be focusing on our energies, and that's my sense.
to the business model of the global capitalist system. Because we desperately need it, because we can't do business and follow their economic models and expect to make any real change. That's my view. Thank you.
I had a question for our political sociologist. I just came over there, I didn't get her name.
Angie Sims.
Yeah, hi Angie. So I really like how you incorporated Kimberly Crenshaw like into your talk on Pan-Africanism, and as you know, that's typically diametrically opposed to what's considered conventional Pan-Africanist thought. So if you could speak to a little bit about like what work that we can do, like all genders, to incorporate that, and do you believe that is necessary to have the labels of the framework that's considerably Western, right? You know, like if you could speak to a little bit about what you think womanism means, like maybe speak to a little bit about just how, again, we can get all genders, regardless if you're continental African or Western African, to really understand that. Because obviously, John Mill, as a black man, addressed patriarchy in a way. You know, Colonel West addressed patriarchy, and most people academically address patriarchy, but how can we make it accessible for everyone and not have it be what's considered divisive, even though I disagree?
African Civilization, Chancellor Williams, and Seeking in Saku by Wade Nobles. Two underlying principles in African culture were the natural rhythm or independence that African people understood in terms of their culture, and that natural rhythm or oneness referred to or spilled over into another concept called the survival of the group. That's why there's a saying, I am because we are, and we are because I am. So my question to you is, in terms of what the brother said, he's talking about individualism here, how our identity as African people after the enslavement process, how we were, our identity was usurped, our culture was usurped. So I think he asked, no disrespect to him, but the wrong question, and you kind of responded by saying, well, we got differences in terms of African culture, but underlying African culture, again, Chancellor Williams and Wade Nobles are saying that the manifestation, the outward appearance in terms of African culture, it looks like we may have, you may be worshiping Oduwan, I may be worshiping Jehovah, another person may be worshiping Allah. But underlying in terms of the foundation of African culture is the oneness of being, and all of us relate to that. And so I would like for you to speak to another thing, patriarchy, matriarchy, in terms of African culture. When you look at the African man, even today, the African American man here in America, we have an egalitarian attitude with our lady, and vice versa. We can switch roles, and that's another part of Seeking the Saku by Wade Noble and Chancellor Williams, Structuring African Civilization. I mean, we don't have that, we're not stuck up like white people. Thank you.
Well, I'll start on the alternative question. You know, we always get into shaky and dangerous territory when we talk about alternatives. Now we know that what we have right now doesn't work. And so what we're trying to do now is to rethink how we organize ourselves economically, to transcend what's in place right now. Now, we know that that is easier said than done, especially for states that exist and have to operate within the world capitalist system. But again, if you look at the process of social transformation, of social revolution from the bottom up, then you understand that there are people who are trying to rethink how we, in fact, organize ourselves economically and are involved in struggle to try to realize those ideals. Now, there are no pristine models right now, but there are these efforts being driven by an alternative set of values. Values that say that we want to move away from the values of capitalist competition, of the irrational use of the Earth's resources, that we want to address the issue of climate injustice and the impact it's having on on collective humanity. And they say that we can, in fact, do that and have economic, quote unquote, economic development that's more humane and more in line with the earth. So, you know, part of this process is that as the people struggle, they create, and through those creations, we'll see what we have that's going to, in fact, work.
To complement what Jean was sharing, I would offer, well, even at the state level, we look at Bolivia, Ecuador, what they're doing, but we have an excellent model that we've known that works, a model that produces near 100% literacy rate, a model that produces higher life expectancy, if not the same as the United States, a model that trains doctors and teachers and dispatch them all around the world, throughout Africa and Latin America. And all this unfolding under an embargo. So whatever that model is that the Cubans are doing, to have high literacy rate, to have long life expectancy, to train doctors from all around the world where they can dispatch them to other parts of the world. That's a model that we really need to look at and see what they're doing, and maybe we ought to be doing the same thing. So, we look in Spain, for example, on a lower level, below the state, we see the Mondragon model. That's been functioning since the 1950s, built on cooperatives. So we have a number of models out there that we can reference that have decades of staying power and demonstrated the degree to which they elevate the condition of human beings. So those are some of the suggestions I would make regarding the economic models.
I think both of them dealt with, in different ways, my desire to differentiate Africans, right? To talk about this idea of intersectionality, this idea of multiple oppressions, to call out this, a lot of it, but not all of it, is a class distinction. And I think we've referenced the fact that many of the elites in Africa right now don't necessarily have the best interest of the common Africans at heart. And so the question is, they're African, so do we just assume that they have African people's interests at heart, or do we have a sense of certain values and criteria that flow from those values that will allow us to evaluate whoever's in power? And so, in my case, when I was talking about black feminism, womanism, to me, womanism and black feminism fundamentally is an effort to distinguish itself from white feminism, which is mostly white middle-class women seeking to achieve their rights. So when we think about something like even childcare, right? If we think about if universal childcare were to come about today in the United States, who would be taking care of those babies, and what would they do, and what would they be paid? It would be brown women, largely taking care of white babies. Not to say that there aren't black women like me who are, have opportunities that would, if we have children, we would need care too. But the point is, we have a system such that as people are incorporated into the social model, it's going to reflect the historical antecedents. And historically, black women and black men, but in this case, I'm talking about black women, have not had the same opportunity. So as they're incorporated into the economic system, they're usually going to have the least remunerated jobs, and it's going to often reinforce their oppression. So to me, if we're moving forward in revolution, it's important to account for the fact that not all of us are situated at the same place, and that all of us have the same interests, right? Some of us actually have a vested interest in maintaining the social order because we on some level, benefit from this stability, and in many ways, some of us are willing to do the master's bidding, as it were, right? And there are ways in which that is rewarded. And so what I'm saying is we need to have different ways, and I think one of those ways with regard to gender is thinking about, how is it, as someone said, I think that we do have models of more egalitarian relationships on average among African descendant peoples. We also know that black women in this country are the most likely to be the victims of domestic violence. And often it's because as black women, we don't want to report it because we don't want our brothers put into a system that we know is not going to treat them fairly. But then we put up with some stuff we shouldn't be putting up with. So then the question is, to whom do we turn? And so I think as we're thinking about revolution, again, we have to think about all of these pathways by which we're oppressed in similar ways, through similar forces, but that our experience of it is distinct, and so the responses must be differentiated enough, even as they're going to see the whole. So to me, I think one of the keys with almost anything in life that's really important is to be able to hold this idea of paradox. Two fundamental issues that seem in opposition to each other at once, right? This idea of the differentiated experience of a poor black woman alongside the fact that she's black, and so there are going to be some common denominators that she's going to have with every other black woman, but at the same time, I'm going to be a black woman with a PhD. I don't know the struggle of a black woman who's struggling to survive day to day. I have options that she doesn't. And so I would be, to me, dishonest if I were to claim to be able to speak entirely on her behalf. Even as I can say, there's a lot that I can understand, there's a lot that I don't. And so to me, there has to be some humility, even as there's some confidence. There has to be some recognition of the history of Ubuntu and collectivism and the African rhythm and bringing that forward, but also thinking about the fact that we have to respond to the world as it is right now. And that some of those dimensions may or may not be useful as we're thinking about how to confront AFRICOM. Because as we just said, there are some people who were not in it with us. They may have pigment, but they are not pro-pigmented people, let's put it that way. And so we have to have a vocabulary for that, a dexterity for that. And so I guess what I was trying to introduce were some terms that we can maybe play with, some tools to think with, that can help us to create the kinds of, as I said, adaptive criteria that are both principle-based, but flexible, to be responsive to the exigency that we're facing right now. So I'll just leave it there, we can talk afterwards. More.
And other people knew also would dismiss the works of Francis Cress Welsing and Bobby Wright and Ron Rodney, who talked about the cultural characteristics of the European and things they may be lacking, right? And how they have to try to pull themselves up to be civilized. So one of the things that came out is that Pan-Africanism is needed, but one of the things that has occurred over the century since the neutralization of Pan-Africanism is this fusion of identities here of us, the different identities. And one of the things I'm concerned about is even us here in the Americas, the different ideologies and thoughts and how we've moved our different behaviors and different things of how we talk about, is Pan-Africanism enough? And I'm kind of directing this to you, Brother Baraka, in some ways. You said you have to know who you are, but what if you don't know who you are? Because back in the day, it was more of a stability of who you are, right? But is Pan-Africanism enough if you are not unified within yourself? And we have younger generations, which I do a lot of research on. They don't want to be African. They don't want to be black. We have Africans who are more white than Africans. So how can I even do a Pan-African movement or go into that? Well, I don't even know who I am. Or I don't even know what I am. I may be both.
You cannot define your struggle against the opposition of your oppressors. You have to create a vision that exceeds and creates the vision of what you want to have, not what you want to fight against. So, and this includes the United States too, because black people in this country have no vision of what they want. Everybody has a concept of what they don't want, but we have very little communal ideas and an agreement on what we want. And then how do we get what we want? And you can use anything from reparations or anything else. So at what point do the Pan-Africanists solve a problem? At what point do you provide food, clothing, and housing? You heal people, you educate people, because if it never translates down into that level of sustainable activity, this room will always be sparsely filled because somebody is going to be providing food when you're hungry and be able to heal you when you're sick and educate you. And that's, I think, a great deficiency on all of these movements. And one of the reasons that the Garvey movement was so great, because they were actually doing those things. They had transportation systems, they had real estate, they were able to feed people at a certain capacity. Most of these things now are purely philosophical. And that's why there is really no Pan-African movement. It's a philosophical idea, but there's no movement because it doesn't do anything. Movements have to do specific, tangible things that make it beneficial for people to be in the movement.
Received stated that you wanted to build an alliance of many people, I suppose, to a broader alliance to further Pan-Africanist objectives.
The U.S. and Europe have gotten rid of those leaders that they were feeding the people, but they were teaching the people how to feed themselves. We just have to take the case of Burkina Faso and Thomas Sankara. Within a matter of 4 years, he was able to make the country food secure and sustainable. He was able to build infrastructure, roads. He didn't call the Chinese in to build roads for him. He called the Burkina Bay to build roads for themselves, right? He was able to include women in the development process like no other leader in his era. He was able to care for the environment and have the Burkina Bay plant trees. He didn't call any international NGO to come plant trees for them. So, if anything, we say that the Pan-Africanists, using the model of Sankara, we failed in defending Sankara. And that's where we should look. How do we defend the leaders that teach the people how to fish for themselves, how to grow for themselves, how to feed themselves, how to build their own roads? So we have concrete models, just as we have here in the United States. We know the independent communities that we've established here, whether we're talking about Tulsa and or in Florida and the Carolinas, when we established self-sustaining communities and they came under attack. So I think the key thing is, how do we become sovereign, right? That has to be part of the equation. So we've had Pan-Africanists who has produced concrete material gains for the people. And as we've seen, when that was done, they weren't able to defend themselves. So, and this ties into the question that the sister asked. How do we do that? How do we get people on the same page? And there's no shortcut to it. It's political education. We have to use political education. That's the model that we're using.
Mass political education.
Yeah, well, we're talking about the masses. The masses, and we see models of where it's worked. We saw how a leader took the resources of this country and utilized the bulk of those resources to invest in education, to invest in health, and then the United States went in and overthrew him, talking about Hugo Chavez, 2002 in Venezuela. But because the people were educated politically, because the people were organized and mobilized, they were able to reverse that coup. They did something that no African state has been able to do yet. So there's something to learn from the Venezuelan model, at least up to that point. So that's one way. Some of the things I would say in terms of the response. There's a tremendous amount of work that needs to be done. I agree with you. The distinction I would make is not so much these are organizations feeding the people, but organizations working with the people so the people can feed themselves, so the people can grow their own food, so people can make their own clothes. And that's a model that we're working on right now in the Congo. I mean, it's just in the Congo with the youth. And that's something that we believe that if we continue our work in political education, through partnership with doctors and clinics to help get access for Congolese to get access to health, working with farmers for Congolese to get access to food. It's not at the scale that you would recognize or people here would recognize, but it's a model that we're working with. It's a model that we've worked with up to 600,000 people in a province called Oriental Province in the Congo. We produced a film on it where the people they are Pan-Africanists, they believe in self-sufficiency, and they utilize the natural resources within their community to develop a self-sustaining community. The film, I think we're online for people, they can go on the internet and they look up Mabeli Nabiso, M-A-B-E-L-E, N-A-B-I-S-O. And we believe that that self-sustaining model is a model that can be applied not only to the rest of the African continent, but also to the rest of the African world. You have literally, I'm sorry to take this off. You have literally 2- and 3-year-olds who are putting in dimes in a collective pot, and that collective pot is used to meet the material needs of the community. So it's a model that we're working with. It's in a community of 600,000 people, and we believe that that's something that can be expanded to the continent. Sorry.
Terms that there is what I consider to be Pan-Africanism versus revolutionary Pan-Africanism. For me, revolutionary Pan-Africanism is a Pan-Africanism that understands that we are up against and impacted by a global structure. That structure is, in fact, this world colonial capitalist system. And that the objective is for us to transform that system, to eliminate that system. When you understand that as the objective, then we aren't confused about what we need to do. So the process of building alternative power is a process that incorporates both the aspect of political education, but also it is to address some of the material needs of our people. We've got to look at building organizations that are comprehensive. That is, in the process of building revolutionary organizations, we have to have organizations that are addressing the material needs of our people, as we also engage in the fundamental work of political education, building alternative consciousness, building a new kind of consciousness. And that process is a protracted process. We're always going to have people who are welded to the system, who don't see the possibility of change, who believe that there, in fact, is no alternative. That comes with the territory. That comes with the territory of how you build revolution. So we're not going to be dissuaded by that. We're not going to be confused by that. It's all part of the work that one engages in when you are involved in building a revolutionary process. So we're not going to judge people based on the most backward manifestations that we see in society. Hopefully, we're not being judged in this country by the fact that masses of our people get behind a war criminal that was basically someone who supported white power and who willingly used the power of the state to oppress and exploit people around the world, and that is your first black president, Barack Obama. Now, we know that in this country, we had significant elements of our people who understood the hustle and opposed that presidency, understanding that Barack Obama was not a departure from white power, that Barack Obama was, in fact, a manifestation and expression of white power. So, we have to understand that the process of building alternative consciousness is, in fact, a process.
The revolution and the, I guess, the internal process that each person has to go through to get to the point where they're willing to make those kinds of sacrifices, and how you get there, and then also how that needs to look in community, and how we have to all start somewhere. And so I think this also speaks to the next steps that was also brought up, and the language we use, I think, as the sister right here said, for thinking about what it is that who we are in the first place, and then what our goals are. And so I guess taking all of that together, I guess one of the things that I would point to is the importance at a very young age, but wherever you are, if you're not young, I don't want you to feel like it's over. But I think it's important to think about, who's in your life that you can influence, and how can you help yourself. But I think one of the things I've noticed is, I don't have children, but I'm a godmother, and so I think about what kind of education is my, goddaughter receiving, or my cousin receiving, and it's amazing the narratives that they're given about America, right? And so we had, Columbus Day, I put that in quotes, and so, we talked about indigenous peoples recognition, and, the slaughter that was Plymouth Rock, and really thinking about what does it mean to have a country founded on first the genocide of people who were already here, and what does it mean to have slave labor be the basis of the wealth that created this country. And so, you know, I have to talk to my cousins because sometimes they're like, okay, too soon, too early, don't hurt them. But at the same time, it's important because they are absorbing already so quickly a lot of these ideas that then make it harder for the revolution to occur because they don't see the reason for the revolution. So I think at that level too, even for individual people, I think, you know, in your churches, you know, it's Black History Month, right? So rather than going through a list of firsts, which is what we usually do, which, it's nice, but at the same time, we should be thinking about those structures that create, the basis for these firsts and why there's only, usually, one or two. And then we wait 10 years for another one or two. And so then again, I think that when you start there, you create the appetite, you create the conditions for which when you say, okay, a revolution is necessary, because we can see that reform doesn't work. We can see years, decades, centuries of how we can move from, qualitatively, have qualitative consistency in terms of oppression, whereby the means through which is meted out might change, but the actual relative conditions of Black people in comparison to others has fundamentally not changed. And so what can we learn from that weight of history? So, and then I guess I would lastly say, sort of start where you are. My mom is in the audience, so I don't mean to call her out, but one of the things she said at Thanksgiving was like, I feel like I'm getting more woke. And so, we constantly have these conversations about Black respectability politics. And so I'm like, Mom, okay, that's the Black respectability politics thing. You got to stand up in NCNW and say, no, this will not stand. So start where you are and say, we need to be thinking about the revolution in the Congo, not just, can we look good, at the next, dinner that we're, charging $50 to come, have people sit at, so we can do something good, I'm sure, in the community, but, but not really seeing the bigger picture. And so I think even starting where you are with the people you know and what it is that what you're internalizing and what your mind is marinating in, and then the kinds of actions you're taking in your everyday lives, how you're speaking about yourself and about Black people, how you're speaking about our history. To me, that is part of the tribe. We never say slaves, right? Their condition was not to be a slave. They were enslaved for the ends of a particular group, but they remained people of African descent who had an identity outside of what white people claimed that they were, which is, effectively chattel that they could use to reap, various kinds of wealth. So I'll leave it there. I know we're running up on time.
Piece right here, right? Particularly for people who never been active. For example, in Washington, D.C., they have the Office of African Affairs, right? I've joined that group, and one of the things I'm going to do at our monthly meeting is to talk about this, right? You inject Pan-Africanist voice whenever you're together with Black folks, on no matter what elementary level it may be, because they have a conscience, right? We have all these Africans who come from Africa, they want to start small businesses, but at what price? So I'm going to make sure that they're conscious of what we going to continue to do here around the city about all Africans, not just the Africans from Ghana, the ones from Ethiopia, from Cameroon. Constantly make that link, because we work hard to get our office on Africa in Washington, D.C., not for just to be a bunch of Africans that want to get rich.
Sometimes we don't pay any attention to. That is, there is a class struggle amongst African Americans and Africans in the world. And we better recognize that. It wasn't white people that killed Patrice Lumumba. They did it at the interest of imperialism, but it was Black people that did it. As Sister pointed out, the fight for the emancipation of women in the United States is a fight that has been led by women and men as a part of the class struggle in the United States. Now, one of the things that we talk about is we can liquidate the concrete into the abstract. Maurice made a very good point, I think. People asked about a model. How we can sit at a meeting of majority African Americans and not talk about the country that has advanced the interests of Africans all over the world more than any other country is beyond me. That's Cuba. That's Cuba. And that's the model. And Cuba is not like it's far away from the United States and imperialism. It's 90 miles away. And they withstood for 50-odd years all of the pressure of U.S. imperialism, blockade, military intervention. 1,500 people invaded Cuba. The Cubans beat them. Now, how did they do that? Well, that's what we should learn about. How do they maintain their system when every imperialist country in the world practically boycotts them? Practically boycotts them. How do they do that? That's the question we should ask. Those are concrete questions. How did they build a revolutionary movement in Cuba that overthrew a U.S.-backed dictator that had all of the resources of U.S. imperialism, and they did it, and they continue to do it? They made a socialist revolution. Come on. It's not a big mystery. But they try to keep us deaf, dumb, and blind, as Malcolm used to say, about what really happened in Cuba. You know, everybody's got the little famous t-shirt with Malcolm and Fidel. Well, ask, how did Fidel do it? Malcolm did. And he wanted to do the same thing in the United States. That's the real point. And I want to just say this thing. We're not all just black people. Sis made the point. She used herself as an example. She's got a different position than a sister who's struggling with 4 kids. Is there a difference between them? They're both black. Barack Obama looks black. But what's the difference? He's not like me who works every day. That's the difference. Or you who work every day, who try to make a living. Those are the people who are going to make revolution. That's the ones who did it in Cuba. Not our professors. No harm meant there. I went to the university too. But that's not who does it. It's the people from nowhere. That's the working class. Black, brown, red, and white. Now, whether you like it or not, there's more white workers in the United States than black workers. And you're going to have to figure out how to deal with that. They ain't going to go away just because we white bait them, or talk about white racism and all that kind of nonsense. We have to deal with capitalism. Call a spade a spade. It's capitalism that's our problem. Not abstract ideas in white people's heads. Not the idea that one white person can come around and kill. In Cuba, you walk around the street, no cop's going to shoot you. I understand that. No cop's going to shoot you. It's not just you got free education. You're safe and secure in your body. That's the difference a socialist revolution is. That's what we have to strive for. I'd urge all of you to strive for it, work for it. If that's the only thing you do successfully in the rest of your life, that's worth doing. Anything else is not worth it. Thank you very much.
Revolutionary Cuba, where the people overthrew a U.S.-backed dictatorship and in the process transformed themselves, gained the confidence to get rid of capitalist property relations and reorganize society in Cuba to meet the needs of the ordinary working people and working farmers in Cuba. And I think that's something that we can learn from and figure out how we can do something likewise in this country. So please drop by, pick up some books, and get information about going to Cuba around May Day. Thank you very much.
My name is Angela Sims. I'm a political sociologist at the University of Pennsylvania, actually a PhD candidate at the University of Pennsylvania, and I participated in the conference today and shared some thoughts on what Pan-Africanism is, how it developed from the 1800s to the present, as well as what Pan-African solidarity meant in the 1800s moving forward, and how that's fundamentally grounded in the relationships that Africans had with Europeans, and how that fundamentally led to Africans and African descendant people having a self-conception that was independent of those who sought to dominate them. And so in tracing that process, I talk about how power continues to work in this current geopolitical context, with the Cold War being our most recent antecedent, but with new forms of imperialism at work, and what it would mean for people of African descent and people both on the continent and in the diaspora to work together toward liberation. And so one of the key things I talked about was the need to see things in paradox, both as common history that leads to us to recognize our shared experiences and our common interests going forward, but then also the fact that each of us also hold other statuses. We have a class status, we have a gender status, for example. So what does that mean for how we fit into society and how we fit into a Pan-African movement? That was something that I tried to address. I think going forward, one of the things that I'm going to do and that I would say that others perhaps can do is to continue to plug into the local Pan-African organizations that are already at work in the local communities they're a part of, as well as having a sense of the global struggle. So one of the other panelists, Maurice Carney, talked about work going on in the Congo, in Togo, so I'm going to follow up to find out from the websites what they're doing so that I can start to spend my money, I can start to send letters, I can start to organize with other people who are doing that work politically and economically. So I'm looking forward to continuing both my scholarly work as well as participating on the ground level with those who are still in the struggle for Pan-African liberation.
Peace and blessings to my brothers and sisters of Africa. My name is William H. Taft. I'm the founder of the DC Local Organizing Council for Empowerment, or DC LOCI. This is one of the first organizations incorporated from the Million Man March. It's my commitment to make sure those men will join in our struggle so we can awaken them from where they are, and that we can have a bond between Mother Africa and DC. For the last 30 years, I've been sponsoring an Ancestor Honor Drum Circle in Malcolm X Park. That's one of the largest parks in DC. It's at the top of the hill facing the White House. So for the 8 years Obama was there, we were drumming and sending the spirit to him to maintain his cultural identity. So I made recommendations at the end, and I wanted to make sure the organization got some of those recommendations. I will be generating an opportunity to create the Capital City Juneteenth Festival in DC. This festival would honor all the people that were freed in DC under slavery, and we still don't have freedom in DC. We still are not a state. We're trying to get a 51st state. So we're a territory. So again, this is our struggle, it's like your struggle. Part two, we want to create an international cultural arts bridge between our nations. Ghana can keep tourism back here to my circle. So my circle is a part of the 50th anniversary for the National Park Service this year. I should be honored for that. And as a result of that, I'm the main person to deal with the federal government for this land. And we have the land from April 16th of the Emancipation Day all the way down to Thanksgiving. So that's enough time for us to do any event in this park. In the past, we used to do it. Kwame Nkrumah used to come here with the All-African Revolutionary Party in the summer. I think it was August or July. We had a festival there for at least 10 years. And then the group split up. It never happened. I want to reactivate that, but make it the All-African People's Empowerment Conference or Empowerment Festival, and come together here and actually start networking once a year, and then have training and development for our leaders from the United States, from around the world on that particular 3-day cycle. We also want to create the Mother Africa Drums of Thunder Festival with on the mall, the National Mall, have each embassy bring their dancers and drummers here for a week-long event, day and night, in which they're dancing and drumming. You have people from your country that are now American citizens. They don't get to have their culture anymore. We want to bridge that gap. It would be a perfect opportunity to bridge the gap, and another opportunity for us to network for Pan-Africanism. Thirdly, you have we have right here the Carter G. Woodson International Center. This is a center that's a part of the U.S. Department of Agriculture. It teaches people all over the world how this black man's farming techniques were the best in the world. Again, the farmers in Africa, the farmers in here could make a partnership together. International trade could happen. Thirdly, there's a place in DC that all of you need to know. It's called the Foundation Center ORG. Foundation Center is every store in America, but they're nonprofit side. So if you have an NGO, make a partner with American nonprofit, church, whoever, then you can get the free stuff you need in your country through the Foundation Center. Every store is there. Oh, you need tables for the school. Now, what company makes the tables? They have a nonprofit number that will give the DC nonprofit the product free, and you just have to get it home. So I hope that these things can help. But remember this, make a difference. What's the first letter of make a difference? M-A-D, mad. So when we don't make a difference, another D is added. So let's not do that, and let's just make a difference and empower our people. God bless you.